go through some of the work around the timer task that comes from the rally car task sheet, because there's some useful things to learn here. So let's see how we go. The first thing we're going to do is have a look at the way in which the program has been set up. It should look like this, and notice I've got a little icon in the corner, and I've got my name. I've just called my form 1. I haven't changed the name there. I should have done that to get that correctly finished. And let's see if notice the stop button doesn't work and the reset button doesn't work, but start button does. There it is, goes 1, 2, 3, 4, and if that got to 60, it would then go 1 there. I can stop it. If I'd like to, I can reset, but I'm going to start it again. So carrying on, it's like doing a lap timer. And then I can stop it. And if I want to now, can you see the reset button is now enabled? Click on that and it's reset to 0. Stop button is now disabled, reset button is disabled, ready to start again. So that's the project. We've got a form that's obviously got a close and a maximize and a minimize button. That's a standard Windows form. You'll notice it's got a name, stopwatch, and it's also got an icon in the corner. That's a .ico file. You have to find that on the internet or use a graphics program to make that. You can't use a JPEG or a PNG, it won't work. The objects on the form are some labels. You've got a minutes label, seconds label. You've got, these are the 3 most important labels: the minutes label that will change, the seconds label that will change, and the tenths of seconds label that will change. There's also some other labels that don't have arrows pointing to them. That's that full stop there and that colon there. Notice that these have been bolded and made quite big so that they show up. The other objects, the important objects as far as the human interaction with the form is, there's a button that you can click for start, there's one for stop and one for reset. So they're all the parts for the form, and you notice that I've named them appropriately: BTN start, BTN stop, BTN reset. That's just form 1. LBL tenth seconds, LBL seconds, LBL minutes. These are the most important ones because these are the ones that are in the code. So let's have a look and see what the events are that we will deal with, because it's very important when we design. We're designing actually our interactions with the program and what happens when we do interact. So let's have a look at the events. The events that will happen are that we will, for example, let me just minimize this down a little bit and zoom in so we can see the right things. Okay, let's have a look at the button start handler. When we click the start button, BTN start, click handler, something happens. What happens? The start button is enabled, and then the start button's enabled, then the timer is enabled, then the timer starts, and then we disable the reset button. The reason why we do this is we don't want people to be able to reset, that is make everything go back to 0 while the timer's running. What we want it to do is wait until somebody presses stop. It'll then stop the count. Then we can do a reset if we choose to, or we can restart the count from where it was before. So that's how this timer works. When the form actually starts loading, we set all the labels to be 0. So the tenth of seconds is given the value 0, the seconds label is given the value 0, and the minutes label is given the value 0. These are the pseudocode for allocating a value to something, in this case the value 0 to the label tenth of seconds. You can also use this same way of writing for setting variables. The next thing that happens once the form is loaded is reset all the values, then disable the reset button, because there's no point having the reset button live when you've just made the form. Disables the stop button, same reasoning. And we enable the start button because we want the user to be able to start the program. Then it enables the timer. That's not the same as starting the timer, it just enables it to be started. So what happens when we actually want this program to run? Well, what happens is that there's an object that we didn't have up here. It's actually put onto the form, but it appears in the background in your programming environment. You don't see it when you're running the file running the file, running the program, because there's a timer sitting in the back of this. Everything sits on top of the timer as far as programming is concerned. So down here, when the timer runs, the event that a timer is responsible for is a tick. Every time the timer ticks, it will cause something to happen. So the tick handler here, first of all, adds 1 to the value of the 10th of seconds label. Then it asks the question, has the 10th of seconds label reached the value 10? If it has, that's true. It means that we're now up to 1 whole second. So if that's the case, it will set the label 0. Then it will increase the seconds label by 1. And then it will check to see if the seconds label's got to 60, because if it has, true, it means that it's got to a whole minute. And if that's the case, it sets the seconds label back to 0 and increases the minutes label by 1. Now most of the time when this test for 10th of seconds is done, it's going to be false 9 times out of 10. So false just means that the event handler has finished, and then it'll sit there waiting for the next tick. Similarly down here, if it gets to the seconds label question, is the seconds label equal to 60, 59 times out of 60, that question is going to get asked and it's going to be false. So when it's false, it means, okay, wait for the next tick. And it doesn't carry on do anything else. It actually just stops and then sits there and waits for the next event. So that's the event handler for the tick. The other event handlers offer the 2 other buttons. This is the stop button handler, stop click handler. So it's just going to stop the timer. Hasn't disabled it, just stopped it. Then it enables the reset button if you want to make everything 0, but it also enables the start button because you might want it to carry on timing from exactly where it was, in which case you just hit the start button again. The other button is the reset button. When that really does, you do want that to do more or less the same as the form creation handler or the form load handler over here. Sets everything to 0, sets the buttons up, and then enables the timer. Well, it's actually exactly the same, except when you hit the reset, this disables the timer, because the next thing you're going to do after a reset is you're going to hit the start button, and the start button actually has the start click handle does an enabling of the timer first anyway. You could argue that in the form load handler you could set that to disable as well, because the next button that's going to get used is the start button, in which case there's already an enable. That's a valid argument. So if you did this, you might slightly change the program. So there's the event handlers set up. Okay, so let's have a quick look at the form. And here's the form in the design view for Visual Basic. And I've set up, there's all my labels set up. And you can see on the right hand side, let's make this a bit smaller, get this out of the way. You can see here that the start button, if you look at the names, BTN start, BTN stop, there it is, and reset, there are BTN reset. And these ones are called LBL minutes, LBL seconds, and LBL 10th sec. Just bear in mind how they're spelled. They're slightly different from how they were on the flowcharts. Okay, so this is sitting in the background. What sort of coding are we going to run in here? Well, the most important coding is down here. Let's have a look. I've added some coding in here so we can have a look at what the coding is like. When the form gets started, this is the handler for the form, and here's the text for this form. The code for this form. So when I set this up, let's just pull this across a little bit. This is the form load handler. How do you get that? you click on the form, and then when you go to the making sure that the form is selected, go to the Lightning Events button, and then the default one is load. There it is. I double click on that and it will make the code inside the coding area. So let's go back to have a look at this. What does it do? Sets lbl 10th sec.text equal to 0. That's the text value of this label. This is the text label of the minutes label. This is the text value of the seconds label. So there's 000. Then it does reset btn reset dot enable. I don't want it enabled, so that means that that value must be false. That's false, and the start button enable is true. That's good. And the timer sex dot enabled property is false. That's all set up. Let's have a look at the start button over here. The start button click handler, I've put it down the bottom of the page. You can get these pages from the OneNote. There's the click handler. And how do I make that? Well, what I do is I click on the start button, and then I can do it from here. I can go events and double click here. I've already done it, so I don't need to double click. So there's that. The other way you can do it is if you're actually inside inside the Visual Basic script. If there's the start click handler there, it's already made. But if I wanted to, I could say I could pick the object from here, btn start. I could then go into here and find the click handler. There it is there. And if I clicked on that, it would make the event handler with nothing in here. So that's two ways of doing it. And remember, from the beginning of our exercises, for buttons you can double click on them also and make the default handler, which for a button is a click, so that's fine. Okay, so let's have a quick look at the coding for that. When we run this, it makes the stop button true, because the next thing after clicking the start button is that the other two buttons, the stop button can be clicked. It sets the timer to true, and the timer's name is tmr_sex, and it's enabled. And it then does this. This is called a method. It's the start method of the timer sex timer element. So that's called a method. Timer sex dot start, that starts the timer. So as soon as that happens, it starts ticking. The other thing that happens is once the thing is running, the reset button is set to false. Now, I think that's set false somewhere else, but this is like a safety aspect, because you don't want to hit the reset while the timer's running. You want to stop it first and then hit the reset. So you're controlling the way in which the buttons function. The other program, the main part of the program, let's have a quick look here, and this is the bit to take a bit of time looking at, is this part here. So here's all of this stuff. Let's have a look at, here it is. Right, so this is the timer sex tick. This is the timer sex.tick handler. There it is there. How would you make that? You would click on top of the timer sex timer, and then you can use this handle over here, the event button, and double click there. Or you could, inside here, you can find the timer in here. Let's find the timer. And timer sex, there it is, timer sex. It's given a different icon, and then the event for that is a tick. So I could click on that and it would make the tick handler. I've already got it in here, so I'm not going to do that. So what does the programming for that look like? Here it is. What it's going to do, this is the bit to follow really carefully. The label for the tenths of seconds has 1 added to whatever the value is it already has. This is the symbol for add 1 to the value that's already in the text. So it's plus equals. That's a very common way of doing it. So that's the same as saying this label's text is equal to this label's text plus 1. It's exactly the same as shorthand. Now, if that text is equal to 10, then you will set the text to 0. You will add one to the seconds label, whatever the value is of that. Then you will test to see if that's 60. Then if it is 60, it will set that label to 0 and add 1 onto the minutes. So this is if you've gone over the tenths of seconds into the seconds, or if you've gone over the seconds into the minutes. If that is not true, then you will just exit out the bottom end if and then end the subroutine. And so it then sits and waits for the next tick. So this tick happens according to this amount of time. Let's have a quick look at this timer. If I look at this timer, if I look at the interval for this, I have to set that to 100 because this runs in milliseconds, which is thousandths of a second, and I'm counting tenths of a second. So every one of my intervals needs to be 100 of the normal milliseconds. So 100 milliseconds is a tenth of a second. So that's why it's set like that. So that's the only other thing you need to know. The rest of it is setting up your other code for the stop button. So set the timer seconds dot stop button. So what happens when you click on stop? It stops the timer. It enables the start button, so you can restart the timer if you want to, and it also enables the reset button because you might want to zero everything back down. The reset button does this. Here it is down here. It does exactly the same as setting up the form. It makes everything into 0. It resets the buttons so that the reset button is not enabled, the stop button is not enabled, the start button is enabled, and then the timer is not enabled until you hit the start button. So that's basically the whole program. So by the time you've done that, this is what the code looks like. So each of those blocks we've just gone through. Yep, all of the blocks are there. And so if I just test this, it should look like this. And notice I've got a little icon in the corner, and I've got my name. I've just called my form 1. I haven't changed the name there. I should have done that to get that correctly finished. And let's see if notice stop button doesn't work and the reset button doesn't work, but start button does. There it is, goes 1.